Amidst the city's incessant rain, a luxury car moved, carrying an important businessman. Inside the vehicle, he was on the phone, finalizing yet another one of his deals with an air of complete confidence. He listened to the details with an expression of someone who already had the entire situation under control. A subtle smile of satisfaction showed that everything was going exactly as he had planned. On the other end of the line, his contact confirmed the final details of the agreement regarding the construction rights for a museum. As soon as the call ended, his assistant reminded him that the meeting with the director was approaching. But the boss didn't seem to care about the schedule. He simply relaxed and demanded that they bring him a coffee. The car then stopped in front of a local coffee shop to fulfill its passenger's order. One of his bodyguards, an imposing man in a suit, entered the establishment to pick up the order. At the counter, the bodyguard placed the order with the barista, a young man who seemed focused on his work. The man's presence was intimidating, marked by a huge dragon tattoo that covered his head. Even so, the barista simply turned and began preparing the drink without showing any reaction. Moments later, he handed over the Americano that had been ordered. With complete professionalism, the bodyguard took the drink and left the shop, returning to the car in the heavy rain. Back in the vehicle, the boss received his coffee. He tasted it, and his expression changed instantly. There was something familiar about that drink. Meanwhile, back at the coffee shop, the barista had no idea what that simple coffee had just provoked. His routine continued normally, oblivious to everything. But for the man in the car, that taste was unmistakable. It was the confirmation he had been searching for so long. He had finally found him. That taste transported him back to the exact moment their paths first crossed, at that very counter. The discovery changed all plans. He turned to his subordinate with a new order in mind as the rain continued to fall. The coffee no longer mattered. The hunt was over. He got into the car and gave the order to depart immediately. Inside, the barista noticed the commotion outside and, without a second thought, ran into the street. But it was too late. The car sped up and vanished into the distance. On the ground, the crumpled coffee cup was the only proof he had truly been there. A silent message. And in that instant, doubt turned into certainty. After hiding for so long, he knew he couldn't run anymore. He had finally found him too. The quiet life he tried to build was about to crumble. The expression on his face showed that he perfectly understood what was coming. The image of that man returned to his mind. The encounter was no accident. It was the past returning to collect its price. Without losing a second, he took off his apron. The barista disguise was no longer necessary. He hurried to ask his boss to leave early, making up some excuse. There was something urgent he needed to do. His worried boss asked him to be careful in traffic, unaware of the real danger he was about to face. With no time to lose, the barista ran to the meeting place. The escape was over. Now it was time to confront the problem. Panting, he arrived at the museum. And inside, the figure he so feared was already waiting for him. The man in the suit waited, impassive. He didn't need to run. He knew the barista would come to him. In the center of the gallery, a sculpture depicted a struggle or an embrace, a piece that seemed to reflect the very tension between the two. While the man in the suit appreciated the art with an air of superiority, the barista could barely hide the nervousness he felt. Finally, the two were in the same place, separated only by art and a past that insisted on not being forgotten. The man in the suit maintained a calm, almost smug expression. He was exactly where he wanted to be, in total control of the situation. The barista, on the other hand, remained silent, unsure what to expect from that conversation. The tension in the air was almost palpable as they finally faced each other, ready for the conversation to begin. The man in the suit began to speak, not to the barista, but about the sculpture. He described it as a masterpiece, elegant and grotesque at the same time. The empty gallery became the stage for that reunion. Every word spoken carried far more weight than it seemed. The barista tried to maintain his composure, but his anxiety was palpable. He knew the conversation about art was just a pretense. The man in the suit continued his analysis, stating that while many saw beauty in the work, it all depended on the viewer's perspective. And, in his opinion, that sculpture was nothing more than a vulgar provocation. The jab was clear and direct, aimed squarely at the barista. He then concluded that, because of this, it was natural for the two of them to get to know each other better. A proposal that sounded more like a threat. Matthew remained silent, processing the veiled threat he'd just heard. The suited man's proposition wasn't a friendly invitation, and he knew it. Suddenly, before he could even think of a response, he was grabbed with brutal force and thrown to the floor without any ceremony. The conversation was over. The man in the suit was no longer interested in pretexts or art. He wanted answers. Caught completely by surprise, Matthew barely had time to understand what was happening. The man pressed him against the floor, completely immobilizing him. The physical superiority was overwhelming. He tried to break free, but the grip on his hair was too firm for any resistance. The situation became even more humiliating as his body was forced down. His face was shoved against the floor, right next to his assailant's shoe. Even in that position, Matthew stared at him, trying not to show the fear he felt. The man in the suit, on the other hand, seemed completely calm, as if this were just a routine procedure for him. He began to search Matthew, looking for anything suspicious. He found nothing, no weapons, no knives. With the search finished, he grabbed Matthew's chin, forcing him to look him in the eyes. Then, he called him by name, confirming he knew exactly who he was. Matthew's charade was over. The man in the suit scoffed at his identity, questioning if he was truly just a sculpture student from the School of Fine Arts. The subordinate insisted Matthew could only be an undercover cop. To him, it was the only logical explanation for that student facade. Ignoring the comment, the man in the suit simply pulled Matthew closer, reasserting his control over the situation. But then, unexpectedly, he gave a new order. He told them to forget everything and let the young man go. The confused subordinate continued to immobilize Matthew on the floor, awaiting an explanation for the sudden change of plans. A smile of pure satisfaction appeared on the suited man's face. He was clearly enjoying the power he wielded over everyone there. He watched Matthew for another moment, savoring the young man's complete humiliation. The young man's belongings, now scattered on the floor, revealed only books and art supplies. No weapons, nothing to incriminate him. The man in the suit picked up Matthew's empty bag. Inside it, he found the wallet and began to inspect it. And there was the official proof of his deception: a student ID in the name of Matthew Rayner from the School of Fine Arts. The subordinate was unconvinced and questioned his boss, asking if he would really just let him go like that, without further ado. Matthew remained silent, head bowed. The humiliation was complete, and there was nothing he could do. The man in the suit replied that they weren't there to use gang tactics or torture someone without concrete evidence. Hearing that, Matthew looked up. He would be released, but the reason behind that sudden decision was a complete mystery. Suddenly, the man in the suit changed the subject. He announced that, since he had plenty of time, he would visit the art exhibition alone. With the decision made, the man in the suit adjusted his tie. He was in total control of the situation, and a new plan began to form in his mind. His subordinate, however, was completely confused by the order to release the prisoner. He didn't understand why his boss was simply letting Matthew go. Meanwhile, Matthew simply crouched down to gather his things. Humiliated and defeated, all he wanted was to grab his bag and disappear from that place as quickly as possible. The man in the suit watched his every move in silence. That calculating gaze made it clear that, for him, the situation was far from over. When Matthew finally stood up, he came face to face with his captor. It was then that the man made an unexpected proposal, inviting the young man for a private conversation. His gaze was cold and piercing. Matthew immediately understood that it wasn't a friendly invitation, but a disguised order he couldn't refuse. But suddenly, a call interrupted the tension in the air. It was Director O from the Municipal Art Museum calling his subordinate's cell phone. The man answered promptly. On the other end of the line, Director O, who was on a golf course, informed them that his game would take a little longer than expected. The subordinate listened to the instructions in silence, processing the change of plans. He turned and discreetly relayed the information to his boss. Upon hearing about the director's delay, a slight smile formed on the suited man's face. That news was exactly what he needed. With an air of satisfaction, he remarked that he now had plenty of time to enjoy himself a bit. Seizing the distraction, Matthew didn't hesitate and ran down the corridor, desperately trying to escape. But the suited man merely watched him, showing no rush. With all the calm in the world, he simply raised his hand, giving a signal. Matthew's escape attempt was about to come to an abrupt end. Matthew's escape attempt ended exactly where it began, in a dead end. He hid in the bathroom, trying to catch his breath and grasp the gravity of his situation. Staring at his own reflection, he barely recognized himself. Panic and adrenaline still coursed through his veins, but the reality of his capture began to settle in. But he wasn't alone. The sound of the door opening made his heart freeze. Through the mirror, he saw the silhouette of the suited man entering the bathroom. The man entered with frightening calm, adjusting his clothes as if he were just taking a stroll. For him, this wasn't a chase. It was merely a game. Matthew retreated into one of the stalls, confused by his body's reaction to fear. He didn't understand what was happening to him. Suddenly, a pair of expensive, polished shoes stopped on the other side of the door. He was cornered. There was nowhere left to run. The stall door opened, and without any hesitation, the man invaded his space, touching him intimately and dominantly. He observed Matthew with a predatory gaze, noting every detail of the young man's reaction to his touch. In a provocative tone, the suited man questioned Matthew's lack of control, pointing out how sensitive he seemed to be. Completely embarrassed, Matthew admitted he had never experienced anything like that before. This was his first time in such an intense situation. The confession seemed to amuse the man, who held Matthew's face to look at him more closely, as if analyzing a rare piece of art. After what felt like an eternity, he pulled away. Wiping his hands with a handkerchief, he casually remarked that it had been fun. Already outside the stall, he turned to the young man and confirmed his name, making it clear he knew exactly who Matthew was. Outside the museum, his subordinate was already waiting with the car door open. The boss's stroll had ended. In the car, the subordinate awaited further orders. The mission to find Matthew had been a success, but the real work was just beginning. The suited man, in turn, lit a cigarette, completely indifferent to the tension of the moment. For him, what happened at the museum was just a calculated step in his plan. He inhaled slowly, savoring the victory. The smoke dissipated into the air, as did any doubt he might have had. He was in complete control of the situation. His subordinate, however, expressed some uncertainty, commenting that to win, they would still rely heavily on luck. But the man merely smiled confidently. Luck was for amateurs. He didn't need it. Meanwhile, Matthew's life was taking a very different turn. He tried to focus on his college class, pretending his life hadn't been turned upside down. But it was useless. Memories of the encounter at the museum left him completely spaced out, and the professor quickly noticed his distraction. Caught by surprise, Matthew could only apologize without a good explanation for his behavior. The professor then called him for a talk in his office after class. That lapse in attention couldn't be ignored. Even in the professor's office, Matthew's mind was still elsewhere, scribbling meaningless shapes in his notebook. He could barely face his advisor, the weight of the situation making it impossible to act normally. The professor started by talking about his distraction, but soon got straight to the point. Matthew's graduation project. He asked if the young man had already found a model, reminding him that the deadline was fast approaching. Under pressure, Matthew lied, saying he already had someone in mind. A quick answer to end the topic, but one that would put him in a new predicament. Matthew listened in silence, absorbing his professor's pressure. The lie he told moments before now seemed to carry an even greater weight. The professor tried to encourage him, saying he needed to put in more effort, but the gesture only heightened the young artist's anxiety. He explained that a successful career like the one Matthew aimed for could only be built with awards and recognition. The expectations were sky high. Matthew felt the weight of those words. He had no role model, no plan, and now carried the responsibility of delivering a brilliant piece of work. The professor watched him, hoping his advice would have the desired effect, completely unaware of the internal turmoil consuming the student. Despite everything, Matthew lifted his head. He had made a decision. Whatever the cost, he would move forward with his project. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, an important negotiation was about to take place at the Municipal Art Museum. A man named Jin Chung-guo from Shinhai Construction arrived to meet with the museum director. He exuded confidence and power. Jin and Director Oh shook hands, formalizing the start of discussions about building a new annex for the museum. Director Oh seemed pleased with the proposal, remarking on Jin's interest in a project that wouldn't generate much profit. Jin found the director's comment amusing. He knew that, ultimately, The conversation wasn't about art, but about other kinds of interests. With a simple gesture, he signaled to his assistant, who was discreetly waiting at the back of the room, to proceed with the plan. The assistant approached and placed a heavy briefcase on the table without uttering a single word. Inside it, there was a small incentive, an enormous sum of money to ensure Shinhai Construction secured the contract without issues. Upon seeing the briefcase's contents, Director Oh couldn't hide his greed. The deal was sealed, not with words, but with a bribe. Jin savored the victory. The incentive had worked perfectly, just as he expected. His smile said it all. Across the table, Director Oh could barely contain his satisfaction. The deal was more than sealed. The director expressed his relief, confirming the gift was very well received. With a bow, Jin concluded the negotiation. Mission accomplished. Jin left the room with the confidence of someone who always gets what they want, closely followed by his men. He took a short pause to compose himself. The easy part of the plan was done. Now it was about personal interest. Meanwhile, his chief subordinate was already relaying the next orders to the team, ensuring the operation continued flawlessly. With the negotiations settled, Jin lit a cigarette, but his mind was no longer on the museum contract. He stepped away slightly, and a recent memory surfaced. The memory of that young man, Matthew, someone he found interesting enough to play with for a while. Back to reality, one of his assistants seemed disturbed by something, but the head of security kept everything under control. Ignoring the slight commotion, Jin gave the final orders for the museum project. It was time to formalize the bribe and assemble the construction team. But with the work settled, his destination was elsewhere. He decided to go to a cafe, a place he himself had criticized before. His men didn't understand why, but they followed orders. Jin stopped outside, observing the establishment. The cafe seemed strangely empty for that time of day, a silence hanging in the air. Inside, Matthew's boss waited for customers who weren't arriving, unaware of the unexpected visit she was about to receive. The silence in the cafe was heavy. Matthew's boss dozed at the table, exhausted by the lack of customers, while the young man continued his cleaning routine, oblivious to what was coming. Suddenly, the door opened. Jin's imposing figure entered the establishment, accompanied by his security detail, breaking the calm of the place. His gaze swept the room, cold and calculating. He wasn't there for a simple coffee. His visit had a much more specific purpose. Jin approached the counter and spoke directly to Matthew, as if no one else was there. The conversation wasn't a request, but a demand. Then, he turned to his men and gave clear instructions. No one was to interfere with what was about to happen. While he handled a quick matter on the phone, one of his security guards kept him informed of every movement inside the shop. Matthew's boss, finally awakened by the commotion, tried to be hospitable and invited the man to sit, seeking to ease the tension in the air. She commented, surprised about his return, saying he must have really liked yesterday's coffee. Jin just listened, pleased with her reaction. In the back, Matthew began preparing the order. He focused on the task, trying to ignore the heavy atmosphere that had taken over the place. Jin watched every movement with a victorious smile. He knew he had found exactly who he was looking for. The plan was working perfectly. Matthew felt the weight of that gaze upon him. An uncomfortable sensation washed over him, but he tried hard not to show it. With the order ready, Jin inspected it closely, as if evaluating a rare work of art. Every detail was important. He picked up the cup, ready for the final test. That taste would confirm all his suspicions and kickstart the next phase of his plan. Upon tasting the coffee, there was no doubt. It was exactly the same taste he remembered, the confirmation he needed to move forward. And then, with a subtle yet meaningful gesture, their hands drew closer across the counter. The power play had officially begun. Without hesitation, the boss took the initiative. With a swift movement, he grabbed Matthew's hand, establishing control of the situation. He acted with unsettling calm, as if that gesture was the most natural thing in the world, questioning the young man's surprise. The grip was firm, a display of power that left no room for retreat or any kind of protest. Matthew, on the other hand, was completely speechless. The man's audacity caught him totally off guard. The boss lifted the barista's hand, analyzing it with almost professional interest, ignoring the young man's obvious discomfort. And then, the unexpected proposal broke the silence. He asked if Matthew would agree to be his model, but the smile on his face made it clear that it wasn't really a request, but rather an affirmation of what was about to happen. The situation was so absurd that Matthew could barely process it. He tried to understand what that man truly wanted from him. While the barista was paralyzed by confusion, the boss continued to inspect his fingers, lost in his own thoughts. Matthew's discomfort was visible, but the man in the suit seemed not to notice, or perhaps simply didn't care. Suddenly, the boss began talking about the neighborhood, commenting that the place forced him to recall an unpleasant past. Matthew tried to interrupt him, calling for his attention, but was completely ignored. The man continued his monologue, dominating the conversation and making it clear that only his voice mattered at that moment. His words were laden with a certain contempt, as if he were judging not just the place, but the life it represented. His speech evoked images of a difficult past, in a place where even the simplest ray of sunshine came with a price. That's where he had come from. The man in the suit asked if this was the way to Matthew's studio, who simply confirmed, moving forward. The walk continued in tense silence, with the boss observing every detail of the place. He seemed to be in complete control of the situation, walking with a confidence that contrasted with the surrounding environment. His expression was serious, almost analytical, as if he were evaluating not just the path, but Matthew himself. As they walked side by side, the boss continued the conversation, asking questions about the young man's family, maintaining psychological pressure. In his thoughts, the man reflected on how that neighborhood remained as degraded as ever. Being there was like being forced to relive his own past. Those streets brought back memories he preferred to forget, a time and place he fought hard to leave behind. And the memories began to surface, sharp as the sound of raindrops falling into a pot, a constant echo of poverty. He remembered the difficult coexistence, the provocations, and the daily struggle for survival in a hostile environment. He remembered the frustration and helplessness of living in a place where even the rain intruded, making everything harder. Hunger was also a constant memory, as was the presence of authority figures who controlled every aspect of their lives. Back then, he felt trapped, watching the world through bars, dreaming of freedom. The only comfort was having a roof over their heads, even if it barely protected them from the rain. It was in this setting that ambition was born. Looking at the buildings being constructed, he understood that to get ahead in life, one had to fight. His companions shared the same dream, wondering if one day they would manage to live in a place like those skyscrapers. And it was with that determination in his eyes that the young man of that era decided he would do whatever it took to escape that reality. Back in the present, the scene was the same one the boss had fought so hard to leave behind. A place defined by the shadows of imposing and decaying buildings. Every step through the dirty, damp streets was a reminder of the past he couldn't forget, no matter how high he had climbed in life. The path to Matthew's studio was down a long, oppressive corridor, which seemed to lead to a forgotten place. At the end of that oppressive corridor, a heavy sound broke the silence. An imposing figure appeared at the entrance, as if already waiting. And there he was. The young man didn't expect to find that person, and the surprise made him stop in his tracks. That encounter was definitely no coincidence. A coincidence. The man stared at him with an air of superiority, clearly amused by the other's reaction. He was exactly where he wanted to be. Unfazed by the provocation, the man simply turned to the notice on the wall. The voice behind him, however, didn't seem willing to end the conversation there. The persistent voice made him turn around. The man following him didn't seem willing to leave him alone, and the forced conversation was about to continue, whether he liked it or not. He stopped, realizing there was no point in ignoring it anymore. That guy wouldn't leave so easily, and the young man's patience was already wearing thin before the conversation even truly began. He turned, cutting the other off mid-sentence. Since he couldn't escape the conversation anymore, he decided he'd at least have it on his own terms, making it clear his patience was gone. The sound of the door opening marked his decision. Since the conversation was inevitable, he would take it to a place of his choosing, where he would finally be in control of the situation. The metallic creak echoed as he descended to the conversation spot. From that point on, there was no turning back. The place was exactly as he imagined, a silent refuge, completely isolated from the outside world. It was the perfect setting for a conversation that would change everything. And there he was, waiting silently on the steps. The young man approached, knowing there was no longer any way to postpone the conversation that had brought him there. The man scrutinized him from head to toe in a judging silence. His superior expression made it clear that the newcomer didn't impress him in the slightest. After the judging silence, the chief finally moved. He wasn't there just to observe the studio, but to make a direct proposal to the artist. His expression was one of pure determination. He had found what he had sought for so long and wouldn't leave without getting what he wanted. Understanding the man's intention, Matthew handed over his portfolio. If it was his work the chief wanted to see, then he would show it. The chief took the folder and began to analyze its contents, while Matthew waited in silence, studying the reaction of the man who had invaded his life. He flipped through the pages with absolute concentration, each work being evaluated by his critical and intense gaze. Matthew watched intently, trying to decipher the businessman's thoughts. The tension in the small studio was almost palpable. Finally, the chief looked at him and explained his obsession. He said Matthew was the personification of an ideal he wished to capture and make eternal. Matthew listened to the proposal, realizing the man saw him not as a person, but as a living work of art, a dream to be fulfilled. The chief's intensity was overwhelming. He confessed it was the first time in his life he had desired something with such force. For him, finding Matthew was like a miracle. The person he had idealized and sought for so long was right there, in front of him. But Matthew wasn't swayed by the man's passion. He processed the offer, and instead of feeling flattered, he saw an opportunity. Then, he imposed his only condition. He would agree to be the model, but the chief would have to obey all his orders without exception. The power dynamic had shifted. The prey, cornered moments before, now dictated the rules to the hunter. To seal the deal and make his dominance clear, Matthew took the initiative with a bold gesture, breaking the chief's superior demeanor. Caught by surprise, but visibly intrigued, the chief began to yield. This encounter was becoming much more interesting than he had imagined. To begin the session under his new rules, Matthew undid the chief's first symbol of authority. The man, who until then commanded everything, merely watched, intrigued by the sudden role reversal and curious to see how far the young man's audacity would go. Each unbuttoned button was another step in the power game Matthew had initiated, deconstructing the chief's imposing image. Then, Matthew proposed a new condition. For the experience to be fair, he also wanted to have fun. And for that, the chief would need to be blindfolded. Using the man's own tie, he prepared to remove his most dominant sense, sight. Control was being completely transferred. With his vision blocked, the chief became completely vulnerable, relying only on his other senses to understand what was happening. Matthew then took his hand, a first contact that established who was in command from that moment on. The chief questioned how he would be able to work that way, his initial confidence clearly shaken by the new dynamic. On the other side, Matthew's expression was one of pure satisfaction. He was exactly where he wanted to be. The two remained silent for an instant, one in total control, and the other completely surrendered to the situation. To provoke him even further, Matthew let his shirt slip from his shoulders, revealing the tattoo on his back. The chief protested, realizing he was being provoked, but it was already too late to back down. Matthew approached, reaffirming his position of power. The agreement would be followed to the letter. However, the chief's hesitation transformed into something different. He realized he was excited by the loss of control. That situation was much more interesting than he had imagined. Losing control was a new and overwhelming sensation for the chef. Excitement consumed his body, leaving him breathless and completely at the mercy of the moment. But suddenly, the moment was broken by an unexpected call. Annoyed by the interruption, the chef answered, furiously asking why they were calling him right at that moment. On the other end of the line, his secretary insisted on discussing work matters, completely oblivious to what was happening. With no patience for further interruptions, the chef simply threw his phone away, shattering the device. He recomposed himself, determined not to let anything else disrupt what had begun. Realizing the mood had been broken, Matthew decided to remove the chef's blindfold, ending the moment. The chef began to get dressed, indicating he was leaving. But Matthew wouldn't let him go without first promising he'd learn quickly and do better next time. The older man listened in silence, showing no immediate reaction to the young man's promise. Matthew, however, held his gaze firm, making it clear he wasn't joking. The chef reached out to take his tie back, but then a smile appeared on his face. He found that attempt at seduction a bit clumsy, but at the same time, amusing and intriguing. And in an unexpected gesture, instead of taking the tie, he placed it back in Matthew's hand. He told Matthew to keep it and set a new meeting, every Friday at the studio. And he warned that next time, he wouldn't let him escape so easily. Matthew remained silent, processing the new rules of the game. He got what he wanted, but the chef made it clear the challenge was just beginning. The scene shifted to a memory of simpler, yet no less complicated times. Matthew remembered how others questioned him, wanting to know why he received special attention from the professor. He recalled the envy and rumors, how tiring it was to constantly justify himself. All the young man wanted was to find a model to focus on his own art, but others only saw favoritism. Amidst this, the professor himself approached him with a proposition. He spoke of an easy job, a way to earn money that, according to him, wouldn't require much effort. The older man insisted, touching his shoulder, telling him to stop wasting time and accept the opportunity being offered. But Matthew refused the offer without hesitation. The professor's reaction was pure contempt, clearly offended that his help was rejected so directly. As soon as he got rid of that unwanted conversation, Matthew tried to go his way. However, he was immediately intercepted by another student, a guy who seemed to have observed the entire scene from afar. The guy commented, with an air of understanding the situation, about how he detested people who offered unsolicited favors, and then acted as if the other person owed them something. Matthew kept walking, ignoring the comment. He wasn't in the mood for more conversations, but the guy didn't give up and followed him, touching his shoulder to get his attention once more. He stopped suddenly. Caught by surprise, the guy in the beanie ended up bumping hard into Matthew's back. Already out of patience, Matthew turned to face the stranger, wanting to know what he wanted. The guy, unfazed by his irritation, simply raised a finger as if about to lecture him or make a joke about the situation. And then he let out a chuckle, amused by Matthew's serious reaction. That encounter was getting stranger and stranger. The guy in the beanie began to speak, explaining with irritating calmness why he was there. He seemed to be analyzing Matthew, as if he knew him. Matthew listened without showing any emotion. That talk about manipulative people and one-sided interactions didn't interest him in the slightest, but the guy continued, asserting that with him, it was different. That when Matthew was with that person, he became so immersed he forgot himself. Tired of that meaningless conversation, Matthew simply turned away, saying he was going ahead and didn't have time for it. The guy then shouted a final warning, telling Matthew not to come crying to him later when he needed help. A warning Matthew completely ignored. Later, at the bus stop, he felt isolated in the crowd. The stranger's words echoed, but his mind was already elsewhere. He could only think of the chef, how perfectly he fit his ideal, as if every line of his body had been designed for him. Back in his studio, this obsession transformed into art. He spent hours trying to recreate that perfection, the only thing that felt real. Every touch on the sculpture was an attempt to relive the memory. He could still feel the sheaf's skin against his palm, a sensation that wouldn't leave him. The pressure of his fingers was firm, almost violent. He completely lost himself in the process, acting purely on instinct, as if the boss himself were there, guiding his hands. With a sharp tool, he traced the contours of the face, recalling the firmness of the bones and muscles beneath the skin, which, though cold, was soft to the touch. Even afterwards, sitting alone in the dark, the sensation of him on his fingers remained vivid. He knew that, no matter the condition, he would never be able to refuse a request from him. He picked up the tie the boss had left behind. He remembered his scent, a subtle sweetness beneath the cigarette aroma, something he couldn't resist. Fallen to the floor, he clung to that fabric. The truth was painful. He knew he would never find another person as perfect as him. That same night, in one of the city's tallest buildings, business never stopped. An unexpected work call was about to come in. The boss ended a call, making it clear that poor phone etiquette would have consequences. His subordinates understood the message perfectly. He sighed, frustrated at having to go out to work on a Friday night. Duty, however, always came first. When the elevator doors opened, his security team was already waiting for him in formation. The night was just beginning. But, to his surprise, he wasn't the only one who had been called. Director Jin was there, with a smile that boded no good. The boss stared at him, analyzing the situation. He already knew that kind of provocation and wouldn't be easily shaken. Jin began to speak, questioning the presence of the security guards on foreign territory, implying that the boss was being too formal. Without a word, the boss approached, invading his personal space. A silent threat, more powerful than any shout. But Jin didn't back down. On the contrary, his smile widened, as if he were enjoying the tension in the air. He then commented that the two were practically family, a statement that sounded more like an insult than a compliment. A slight smile appeared on the boss's face, who responded to the provocation with the same intensity, noting that Jin's defiant gaze remained the same as always. Jin merely agreed, satisfied he'd gotten a reaction from him, and said it was enough talk of old times. But the boss's patience had a limit. That power game was already getting old. Jin then touched his shoulder in a gesture of false camaraderie. He continued to provoke him, mentioning the Madam President and the boss's loyalty. He leaned in even closer, whispering about how the symbol of loyalty on his back seemed to have been useless, a direct and dangerous provocation. Jin kept provoking him, mentioning the Madam President and the boss's supposed loyalty. He questioned if the symbol the boss carried on his back had proven useless, a low blow to test his limits. Meanwhile, at the cafe, Matthew overheard a strange conversation. One of the customers insisted that what happened to him was nothing, that it didn't even hurt. They were two of Jin Chungwoo's subordinates. One of them, all bruised, tried to justify the situation, saying the boss only did it for a good reason. The other agreed, stating that everything was fine, but Matthew couldn't understand how anyone could find it normal to be assaulted like that. Seeing their condition, the cafe owner approached with a first aid kit. He offered them coffee and asked, genuinely curious, how they had gotten hurt like that. The subordinate explained it wasn't a fight, but rather a severe scolding from the boss, because their work was getting sloppy. The cafe owner's kindness left the two henchmen completely flustered. They weren't used to that kind of treatment. Matthew then approached to tend to the man's injuries, carefully cleaning the wound. He grabbed a bandage to apply to the henchman's face, who continued to defend his boss's actions. With the bandage in place, Matthew used the cold cup to help with the swelling, which caught the man by surprise. Sitting at the table, the henchmen tried to explain their loyalty. They said that, for an outsider, it was hard to understand the world they lived in. They argued that, in their profession, life and death depended on the organization they belonged to. The injured man confessed that, if it weren't for the boss, he would have been dead a long time ago. It was a life debt. Matthew's boss was amused by the henchman's story, finding humor in the blind loyalty they showed their boss. The conversation then turned to the past, to a time when the Shinhai family wasn't yet the empire it had become. It all started with construction, but the boss quickly expanded his business to clubs, malls, and hotels. And those were just the legal ventures, the tip of the iceberg of his power. Matthew and his boss listened to the story in silence, processing the extent of that man's power and influence. The henchman then tried to justify the boss's violence, explaining that, as an older brother to them, he felt he had the right to be tough. He even said that getting beaten by the boss was an exciting experience, which left Matthew's boss completely embarrassed by the situation. The conversation continued inside the coffee shop, with the henchman insisting that the boss wasn't the type to get annoyed by just anything. Suddenly, one of the men's cell phones started ringing non-stop, interrupting the story. It was a call he seemed unwilling to answer. Ignoring the phone, the man turned to Matthew and apologized for mistaking him for a police officer at the art museum some time ago. Matthew accepted the apology, maintaining his usual calm and inscrutable expression. The conversation then took a darker turn when one of them mentioned that the boss had the organization's name tattooed on his back. Hearing this, the other henchman reacted sharply, as if a terrible secret had been unintentionally revealed. Matthew watched the reaction carefully, realizing he had touched upon a much deeper and more serious point than he'd imagined. The man tried to explain the situation to the boss, gesturing desperately to justify what that meant in their world. Matthew's boss looked at him, worried, but the young man seemed only to absorb the information, connecting the pieces of that dangerous puzzle. Matthew's boss couldn't hide her revulsion, commenting on how horrible it all was. Jin, however, remained impassive, observing the scene without showing any emotion. That brought back a memory for Matthew, the beginning of everything, when he felt drawn to that powerful and shadowy figure. He remembered the moment he broke with his past, choosing a point of no return to follow that man. His boss realizing the depth of the problem, became visibly worried about what might happen to the young man. But Jin seemed to be amused by the situation, displaying a subtle, confident smile. One of Jin's men approached Matthew, formally calling him an attendant. The henchman warned him, saying that no matter his relationship with the boss, he'd better prepare for the consequences. Matthew listened to the warning in silence, without averting his gaze, completely unfazed. He simply replied that if he were worried about the risks, he never would have started this. Then, Matthew changed the subject and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a key and asked the man in front of him for a favor. The message was for Jin. Matthew would be waiting for him at his studio on Friday. The scene then cut to a demonstration of Jin's brutality. A bloody man warned him that his actions wouldn't end well. Jin, indifferent, simply wiped the blood from his hand, saying it was the man's lucky day. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a man tried to justify himself. But his words about betrayal were useless given the situation. The memory of the violence was still fresh. A brutal blow struck him squarely, without any warning. Jin held the man's hand, asking with a false tone of concern if he could endure continuing. The threat behind the question was clear. The man tried to confront director Jin, but the intimidation had already done its job. The order at Shinhai Construction was not to cause trouble, a rule that clearly didn't apply to everyone. Wiping blood from his mouth, the man questioned Jin's audacity, acting as if he owned the place, kicking down doors and ignoring everyone. Jin merely approached from behind with a superior smile, savoring the tension in the air. He leaned in, a silent gesture of dominance that spoke louder than any words. With his message delivered, Jin simply turned his back and left, leaving the man behind with his humiliation. He walked down the hallway with the confidence of someone who had just resolved a minor annoyance. Arriving at his next destination, Jin didn't bother to knock on the door. He kicked it open, announcing his arrival in a far from subtle manner. Standing at the entrance, he looked inside and got straight to the point, wanting to know why exactly he'd been called there. Sitting in front of him was the president of Shinhai Construction, who watched him with calculated calm. The president of Shinhai Construction, however, didn't seem fazed in the slightest by Jin's violent entrance. He merely stared at him with an analytical gaze, sizing up his opponent. A smirk appeared on his face. He clearly wasn't intimidated by the young man's display of strength. On the contrary, he seemed to be amused by the situation. With complete composure, the president leaned back in his armchair, showing he was in control and perfectly at ease in his own territory. His thoughts, however, were far more turbulent. He reflected that the more he considered the idea of devouring someone, the more irritated he became with the whole situation. His internal frustration was so great that he had to put a hand to his head, trying to contain the impatience he felt beneath that calm facade. Seeing his boss's agitation, an assistant approached and placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture to calm him and bring him back to the conversation. The tension between Jin and the president was palpable. The elder provoked him, stating he would be the organization's next president and wouldn't hesitate to use a certain child as bait for his plans. Fed up with the conversation, Jin stood up and turned his back on the president, ending the meeting on his own terms. But the president wasn't finished yet. He said that despite not being satisfied with anything about Jin, he always believed in his capabilities. Already in the car, the assistant reported that Director O had returned something they had sent intact, a clear sign that the initial plan had failed. The news made the president narrow his eyes, another obstacle in his path. He questioned his assistant about the museum construction report, wanting to know why, after everything, they were still in that situation. The car stopped in a parking lot. The next meeting was about to begin. The president remained silent for a moment, processing the previous failure and already planning his next move. Without wasting time, he presented a new proposal to another man. He offered a briefcase full of money in exchange for the museum's construction rights for Shinhai Construction. The president's assistant began to explain the situation, admitting an error on his part. The conversation was now about the real obstacle they faced. The president listened with a serious expression. He needed to understand why the construction of that art museum was so important and, above all, so complicated. The problem, as the assistant pointed out, wasn't the construction contract itself. The real challenge was acquiring the land where the museum would be built. He continued, revealing that long before the president entered the business, that area was already a contested prize, a place that caused conflicts among several powerful organizations. The assistant detailed how the government intervened, taking possession of the land to mediate conflicts, which only further complicated the situation for anyone wanting to buy it. The president processed the information. Now, the actions of his rivals, like the director of Bumyung Construction, began to make more sense. He understood the game's complexity. The dispute was much older and deeper than it appeared on the surface. In his thoughts, the president outlined the strategy. The company with the construction rights would have the advantage. He refused to be defeated by Shinhai's traders and decided he would find Director O. The decision was made. He wouldn't back down, no matter how difficult the dispute for that land became. Later, in his car, the engine's sound echoed in the parking lot. The day's tension began to weigh on him. Suddenly, a crisis hit him. A tremor took over his body, a symptom that had been becoming more frequent. He tried to control himself, feeling the accumulation of stress and frustration. The pressure was taking its toll. With his head throbbing, he closed his eyes, trying to endure the pain and discomfort that overwhelmed him. The president leaned back in the seat, completely vulnerable for an instant. The facade of absolute control had finally cracked. It was then that a knock on the window interrupted him. One of his men was calling him, bringing him back to reality. The boss, now composed, got straight to the point. He asked his subordinate if they had found Director O yet. The trusted man reported that the whole situation seemed to have been very carefully planned by someone. At the director's residence, they found a cloned cell phone, which seemed to have been left there on purpose, like bait. The device contained important data, but a crucial clue was in the call log. The boss noted that the phone had numerous repeated calls to the same number. An obsession or a message. He then called the number, determined to find out what led Director O to give up the bribe and hide. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Director O himself tried to remain calm on a golf course. Suddenly, his phone began to vibrate. The call he most feared had finally arrived. The tension was so great that he gripped the golf club tightly, feeling the pressure of the moment. He tried to focus on the game, but he knew his time was running out. That's when he heard applause. One of the chief's men had found him, congratulating him ironically. The subordinate approached, informing him that the mission was almost complete. He handed over a phone, telling the chief that the same number from before was calling again. The chief answered with a serious expression, ready to confront whoever was on the other end. However, upon hearing the voice, a slight smile appeared on his face. He knew exactly who he was talking to. On the other end of the line, the chief spoke with the person he had finally found. He asked who it was and where Director O was, maintaining a calm and controlled tone. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, the facade of a studio called Sunset Pictures seemed quiet. Inside, Matthew decided to wait. He didn't know what time the person would arrive, but he figured it would be at night, so the best thing to do was wait at the studio. Lost in thought, he wondered if he would go through the same situation as before, questioning if his eyes would be blindfolded again. A disturbing memory came to his mind, a tense encounter in a dark room, where he found himself facing a dangerous man. Back in the present, Matthew looked at the clock. Time was passing slowly. That's when his boss approached, looking worried about something. She showed him something on a tablet, trying to warn him or give advice, with an expression that showed she knew he was getting into trouble. The woman seemed genuinely distressed by the young man's situation. Matthew then read the instructions on the screen. They were explicit recommendations on how to use a plug, with details on cleaning and lubrication. He was speechless, processing how bizarre and awkward that conversation with his boss was. Later, Matthew finally left the studio. He walked down an empty alley, heading to his appointment. There was a look of resignation on his face. He seemed to be preparing for what was coming next. His destination led him past a sex shop, making it clear what kind of encounter he would have that night. Matthew turned the corner, approaching the meeting place he clearly didn't want to be at. Meanwhile, in a luxurious and empty bar, another story unfolded. A powerful man, known to the world as Director Jin, drank alone, immersed in his own thoughts and problems, until his phone rang. On the other end of the line, the conversation was about business and old acquaintances. Jin listened intently, his gaze growing colder with each word he heard. He stood up, continuing the call as he walked around the place. His patience was clearly running out. The conversation took a darker turn, with Jin making a comment about the other person's past. He wasn't there to make friends, but rather to make one thing very clear. With a subtle smile, he warned that what the person on the other end of the line possessed wouldn't be enough for what was to come. As soon as the call ended, Jin's frustration exploded in a single violent gesture, slamming the glass on the table. At that moment, one of his subordinates approached to give a report about Director O. But the news wasn't good. Jin sank into the couch, irritated by his team's incompetence, as they still hadn't found the person they were looking for. He poured himself another drink, trying to drown the anger he felt. The subordinate simply bowed in a silent apology, knowing he had failed his boss. Jin massaged his forehead, feeling the weight of the situation. The search was taking longer than planned, and it made him dangerously impatient. As Jin drowned his frustrations, his subordinate commented on how he seemed to use drinking to ease his problems. With a confident smile, the man said that no matter how much Jin drank, it would never be enough to bring him down. Jin took another sip, indifferent. The drink no longer had any effect. Seeing the opportunity, the subordinate leaned in and asked if Jin wouldn't like to try something that would really make him turn over. The proposal was tempting, especially for someone in Jin's state. The man then pulled something from his pocket, calling it the dream pill. He promised that just one pill would make Jin feel like he held the world in his hands, revealing his deepest desires. Jin remained silent, but his expression showed that the offer had piqued his interest. Without waiting for a verbal response, the subordinate prepared a fresh glass. He dropped the pill into the drink, a silent and dangerous invitation. The tablet slowly dissolved, changing the liquid's color. Jin watched everything without a word, his decision already made by his inaction. The subordinate then handed him the glass, promising he'd be on cloud nine in a second. After taking a sip, Jin felt his mouth go dry and his throat tingle. The effect was starting, but what he was about to see remained a mystery.